In this session, we will be looking at private sector funding. And wherever you're taking this course from, it is important to know that we have private sector organizations or entities or corporate bodies in our immediate environment. And the key question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we capitalize on the existence, on the opportunities, on the potentials of these corporate bodies, of these private sector organizations to scale up our social mission. Within this session, we will be exploring avenues of collaboration with the private sector, and we will also enable that as participants, we get to know how to set up and run a robust private sector engagement strategy. We hope that by the end of this session, we will understand the role and need of engaging the private sector in the resource mobilization efforts of the organization. We will also know the different steps in developing and implementing a private sector engagement strategy to generate alternative revenues for our organization, and we will be able to create an organizational action plan for implementation for our organizations. We will also be exposed to some of the potential challenges or pitfalls that may come along with the exploration or adoption of this model, so that we should be mindful of what awaits us before we engage in this model. In terms of understanding what the private sector funding is, it involves innovative partnership or formal or informal arrangements between civil society organizations and the private sector with shared objectives to achieve the same social and economic goals. And so in this case, it is important to take into consideration what the social mission or the overall objective of the private sector institution you want to partner with is, or you want to capitalize on their support or their funding is. And you also ask yourself, how does your objective as an organization align with those of this private sector institution? There should be elements of compatibility in terms of your goals. Some benefits that come with the private sector funding model is that it is flexible and it provides a flexible and fast response and assistance to high-risk projects. It bridges the capacity gaps for long-term sustainability of the civil society organization, and it increases the volume and quality of corporate giving to your organization. Organizations that can consider using this model include service-based organizations or advocacy and expert groups. In order to use this model or apply it for our work, there are some key steps that we need to follow. Firstly, outline your partnership vision and mission. It is important as a civil society organization to be clear about what you want to achieve. That way, you will be able to bargain on equal terms and with clarity based on your vision and mission. Define the objectives or goals needed, resources, key agents of change needed to accomplish your objectives. It is important to factor in all of these elements right from the onset by your organization. Third, you need to describe potential barriers to your partnership success and how you would overcome them. In this case, it is important to be forward-thinking, to be proactive as opposed to being reactive. So it's important to think ahead, think about the future, what are some of the potential barriers to your success, and you should be able to outline some mitigation strategies prior to engaging in the partnership. Fourth, you need to identify the financial resources that you need This gives you that strong possibility of arguing with confidence, arguing with facts based on the prior analysis you've done as an organization. 5, you need to describe how responsibilities will be shared. It is important that when, as a civil society organization, if you're going into such partnerships, you should be clear on the roles and responsibilities of all parties. That way, you will not be imposed upon to do or to take upon things that are beyond your capacity or that are not within your reach. And that way, you will not also be swallowed up by a partner that wants to collaborate with you. Also, you should describe how the partnership will maintain momentum and foster renewal. It is important to devise mechanisms that will enable you to enjoy the process as well as your partner. That way, how will you be learning from the process? What innovations can you both be bringing on board? And all of these will give you momentum and build some sense of renewal, of renaissance, of reawakening, even as you move along with the private sector partner in terms of, achieving your common goals. Some guidelines that we need to take into account, as civil society organizations that want to engage with the private sector. First of all, develop, communicate, adhere to, and continuously refresh partnership principles. The key principles that you define from the onset of your collaboration need to be revisited periodically and renewed to adapt, to align with contextual realities. Be honest and openly debate your own challenges. So come to the fore with your challenges, discuss them frankly, openly, and honestly in a way to see how the partnership can enable you to respond to those challenges, and also be open to listen to the challenges that your partner puts on the table and see how you can develop a win-win strategy to overturn these challenges. Be prepared to recognize and reward exemplary business practice and expose and condemn poor practice. With your partners, it's important to recognize successes, recognize good practice, and outline challenging practices or poor practices that are not befitting for a successful partnership and that are not key to nurture a good sense of good practice in the sector. And fourthly, engage directly with citizens to scrutinize and exert accountability over the private sector. It is important to remember that as a civil society organization, you are accountable to your beneficiaries, you're accountable to key stakeholders. It is important to also give these beneficiaries, these stakeholders, the opportunity to demand accountability from the private sector in line with your partnership relationship. Some of the challenges that as civil society organizations, we should look out for in engaging with the private sector is the perception of private sector on civil society actors. You should understand that there is already a perception, depending on your context. How does the private sector perceive civil society organizations? It is important to interrogate these perceptions and see how you develop a counter narrative that favors your initiative and your partnership. Different use of terminologies. The private sector uses different terminologies. As civil society organizations, we also use different terminologies. It is important to harmonize these terminologies, agree on them, and have a common understanding of the different terminologies that we will be engaging or using in the course of the partnership. At best, it is important to communicate in simple, clear terms, language that every stakeholder, including the private sector, can understand. Partnership with civil society organizations may be on short-term or immediate issues, and so it is important to understand that some private sector entities can want to collaborate with our organizations on just short-term goals. It is important to be open to that, see how you make the most use of these initiatives or these short-term collaborations to scale up your work. Corporate philanthropy may position themselves as competitors to civil society organizations, and so it's important to look at how you can capitalize on what you can gain from that partnership, to grow, to scale up your institutional capacity and the impact you're making, and to discuss the potential threats in terms of competition right from the onset and see how you can minimize that at best. Also, there is the fear of civil society organizations losing their decision-making capacity, autonomy, and becoming dependent on private funding. And so it is important and that is why it is important to diversify funding so that you don't stay at the beck and call of a partner. Rather, you have equal strengths, equal voice, equal power, because in as much as the funding from the private sector is quite valuable to your work, you also have additional funding from other sources that can enable you, to complement the funding that is coming from the private sector. That way you discuss as partners, as equal partners with equal strength. There is also the element of mistrust and reluctance to collaborate with private sector, and so it's important for us to open up, to be able to keep aside that closed approach of working, and open up to other innovative initiatives, particularly from the private sectors. Civil society organizations raising funds from individuals is still challenging, so it's important to find ways, develop a case for support that can enable you to tap into private individuals, private entities to scale up your work. One thing to note is that the private sector is a central actor in the development space, in the development sector. And so through networking, strategic planning, commitment, and accountability, your organization, our civil society organizations, can engage and generate funding from the private sector. Again, after taking this session, it will be good for you to assess what you've been able to learn. And so take this quick assessment and appreciate how much you've been able to retain from this session. Thank you very much.